Welcome to this 7th lesson on situation ethics, where we're going to look at love's limitations. This is actually quite a complex part of the specification, and it comes into two parts. The first bit being, does Christian love allow people to do anything depending on the context? And then, how far is it true that love should be the highest Christian law, overruling all others when necessary? So if we start with the first question, does situation ethics give carte blanche to allow a Christian to do anything depending on the context? Well, let's explain the origins again of situation ethics. On the one hand, we have antinomianism, which is the belief that there are no moral rules at all. Situation ethics does not agree with that. So it looks as though the more kind of controversial side of that question on the specification is not true. It looks as though situation ethics is not going to allow us to do anything that we want. There will be limitations. The question does say depending on the context, and that's obviously going to be crucial, so we'll come back to that. The other extreme of the moral decision-making spectrum is legalism, and this is the view that the correct moral action can be deduced beforehand, that there are set rules that we need to follow, and if we follow those rules, we're a moral person. Situation ethics rejects that as well. It operates this middle ground between the two. There is biblical support for this position. When Jesus is asked to sum up what are the most important commandments, he says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and then to love your neighbour as yourself. Because Jesus is focusing on love, we can say with some degree of certainty, along with a situation ethicist, that love is the most important part of Christian moral decision making. And in fact, Jesus isn't being too radical here, because he's just summarising the 10 commandments, the first 3 of which focus on love for God, and the final 7 on love for the neighbour. Fletcher's rather controversial claim, however, is that Jesus in doing this is rejecting the validity of the 10 commandments and all other strict universal moral laws, and is instead replacing them with this love-based ethic. This is not universally popular amongst Christians, and we will see that in a second. But for that first part of the question, does situation ethics seem to allow anything? No, it doesn't. What it does do is say that any moral action that brings about the most love can be permitted. But situation ethics is not antinomian. Now we can move on to look at the second part of the question, which is to what extent should love conquer all other Christian moral rules? Can love overrule all other moral rules? To analyse this question, we've got to look at Thomas Aquinas, who was a Catholic monk in the 13th century. Aquinas claimed that we should follow reason, not emotion. And whilst that sounds literally very logical, remember it is the exact opposite perspective to situation ethics, which is founded on an emotion, love. Aquinas says that there is a natural moral law, in fact the world is made of natural moral laws that can be discovered by the use of our reason. Aquinas believed he'd discovered 3 natural inclinations: that we want to exist, we want to reproduce, and we want to achieve fellowship with God. From these natural inclinations, he produced a list of primary precepts: self-preservation, preservation of the innocent, continuation of the species, we want to live in society, worship God and educate children. And from these primary precepts, he derived secondary precepts, which are specific rules. Do not murder, do not abort the unborn, do not commit suicide, and defend the defenceless. Now, the crucial thing about this whole web of laws is that for Aquinas, these are all fundamental Christian duties. They arrive out of scriptural reading and an intelligent observation and rational reflection on the nature of God's world. We cannot simply dismiss them in favour of some nebulous idea about love. Remember, we have to follow reason and not emotion. So to look at the difference between the two, Aquinas is saying that the world is full of natural moral laws, and Joseph Fletcher is saying that's not the case. There are no natural moral laws, we just have this one principle to follow. They both have biblical evidence on their side. Aquinas basically has the whole of the Old Testament, but he also has key verses in the New Testament. Take this line from Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." This seems almost directed at Fletcher. Jesus is literally saying you have to follow moral laws. So you'd think that it's game, set and match to Aquinas at this point. However, in the very same gospel, Jesus goes on to say that the first and greatest commandment is to love God, and the second is to love your neighbour as yourself. And this provides sustenance for Fletcher's view. In conclusion then, we have Aquinas saying that we need to follow reason and natural law, not emotion, and therefore love cannot conquer all our other moral obligations. And you have Fletcher saying that there is no such thing as natural and universal laws, and that our moral obligations arise simply from following that one emotion, love, just as Jesus appears to have said, and applying that to a variety of situations in a fluid and situationalist manner. Now, it's up to you what you think should be the correct answer to this question. Is Fletcher right, or is Aquinas right? Is situation ethics right, or is Roman Catholic ethics right? The crucial thing here is that you have this juxtaposition to make in the exam, where you can say, on the one hand, some Christians really believe in following laws because they seem to arrive naturally from reflection, interaction with God's creation, and other Christians saying, no, Jesus is a radical reformer who rejects the old archaic laws of the Old Testament. The decision ultimately as to who is right is yours.